They said it to my face, not in heat, not in a moment they would later regret, but calmly, with the precise voices they use in boardrooms and negotiations. Marco set his hands flat on the table and looked at me without apology. Ivan leaned back as though this had already been decided. I was 81 years old, sitting at the table I had built with my own hands 4 decades ago, and they told me I was worthless, that I couldn't manage anything anymore, that I needed to sign the papers. I sat still and felt something inside me go cold. Not broken, cold, like water the moment before it freezes solid. I want to tell you what happened in the 6 months that followed, not because I am asking for pity, not because I need you to confirm that I was right. I want to tell you because I think you may understand what it feels like to become invisible inside your own life, to be looked past by the people who should know you best. And I want you to know something I have learned at a cost I do not recommend. That story does not have to end where they write it for you. I rewrote mine. This is how. If any part of what I have described already feels familiar, stay with me through to the end of this. I am going to tell you everything. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do that now. It costs you nothing, and it means I can keep telling stories like this one. I would also like to know where you are watching this from today. Leave it in the comments. I ask because every time I look at those messages, I remember I am not speaking into empty air. Someone is listening. Maybe that is enough for both of us to keep going. My name is Nikola Petrovic. I am 81 years old, and I was born in a stone house 2 streets from the Adriatic, in a coastal town in southern Croatia, where the summers are long and dry, and the winters teach you patience without asking permission. I spent 43 years running a fishing supply business that I built from a single boat, a storage shed, and work that started before sunrise and ended after dark. I raised 2 sons. I buried a wife. I kept the house. Those are the main facts. The other facts, the ones that matter for this story, took me much longer to see clearly. The house stands near the water on a narrow street. It is white, with a low iron gate, and a fig tree in the courtyard my wife planted the year Marco was born. The bedroom window looks toward the sea. The kitchen has green tiles she chose herself, debating the exact shade with me for longer than the purchase deserved. I fixed the roof 3 times. I replanted the garden after the storm in 1998. I know every wall by what it remembers. When she died 2 years ago, I understood that the house was the only place left on earth where she still existed in any form I could touch. My sons began visiting more frequently after the funeral. At first, I read it as grief, as the natural pull of loss that draws a family back toward its center. Marco is a corporate lawyer in Zagreb, precise and deliberate, a man who speaks in complete sentences. Ivan is a real estate broker in Split, agreeable in the manner of someone who calculates before he smiles. Both successful, both strangers in ways I had trained myself not to examine too directly. I was a father. I believed in the version of my children that I needed to believe in. That is not weakness exactly. It is a particular kind of loyalty that has no name. The comments began subtly. A remark about the upkeep. A question about the property valuation along the coast. A casual observation that a man my age perhaps did not need so much space. I told myself it was concern. I was good at telling myself comfortable things about my sons. Ivan stood in the kitchen once, in front of his mother's green tiles, and spoke on the phone about the property in a tone so flat and professional it made my hand grip the counter edge. Marco brought papers on one visit and left them on the table without a word, as though proximity alone were persuasion enough. I moved them aside. I did not look at them closely enough. Then they brought a doctor, a polite man with a soft voice and a professional manner who asked me questions about dates, names, sequences of events. I sat across from him with my hands folded in my lap, and I answered every question correctly, calmly, completely. He found nothing. But the fact of his presence, the fact that my sons had arranged this, settled into me like cold air entering a room through a gap you cannot locate. They were building a case, not for a court, not yet, but in the way that men who plan carefully build the architecture of an argument before they need to use it. I was the argument. There are humiliations that arrive loudly and ones that arrive without sound. The loud ones you can respond to. You know what is happening. You have language for it. The quiet ones are more dangerous because they accumulate without your awareness, and by the time you register the weight of them, you have already been carrying them for a long time. My sons were skilled at the quiet kind. They would speak about me in the third person while I was present, discussing my routine, my limitations, my future, as though I were a piece of furniture that had not yet been informed of its own redundancy. I began to feel the shape of my own erasure. Ivan called once and asked, in what I believe he intended as a kind tone, whether I had thought about what would happen to me if I became unwell. Not when, if, as though he were raising a hypothetical he had not already spent significant time planning around. Marco emailed links to care facilities on the coast. He described them as options. He said I should think about it without pressure. Everything they offered was framed as concern, which made it harder to hold in my hands and examine properly. Concern and control wear the same coat when the person wearing it has decided that your welfare is something they should be managing rather than something that belongs to you. They came together in February, on a weekend when the town was quiet and the sea looked gray and indifferent through the kitchen window. They sat at my table. Marco opened his folder and began speaking with the measured cadence of someone laying out the terms of a contract. Ivan added details, numbers, phrases like reasonable timeline and fair arrangement, and your comfort and security. I listened to them describe my life as a logistical problem they had come to solve. At one point, Ivan said something like, "You must understand this is what's best for you now." I looked at his face. He believed it. That, I think, was the part that cut deepest. He had convinced himself. I did not argue that evening. I said I needed time to think. They exchanged a look. The look adults use when an elderly person delays in a way that sounds like confusion. Marco said he understood, in the tone of someone who does not intend to wait. They left before dinner. I sat at the table after their car disappeared and thought about how many years I had eaten here, how many conversations had taken place in this room that belonged to neither of them. I was not angry. I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The next morning I found myself opening the old chest beneath the bedroom window, looking for my wife's recipe book, which I sometimes read not for the recipes but for her handwriting in the margins. Beneath it was a folder I had never placed there and never seen. Inside was a letter in her handwriting, unsealed, addressed to me. And beneath the letter were printed pages, emails between my sons and a property developer in Split. The exchanges began 4 months before her death. She had discovered the correspondence. She had written the letter to warn me. She had not known how to place it in my hands while she was still alive, and then time had stopped being available to her. I read the letter twice. The first time quickly, the way you read something your body understands before your mind does. The second time slowly, word by word, stopping where sentences paused. She wrote that she had found the emails by accident and had waited, hoping to misunderstand. She wrote, "Nicola, I don't think I am misunderstanding." She was afraid not of our sons, but of what would happen to me when I was alone, and they understood how completely I trusted them. She was right. I set the letter on the bed and sat beside it, and looked at the window for a long time. What I felt was not grief in the ordinary sense. The grief of losing her I already carried. 2 years of it, familiar as an ache. This was different. This was the grief of understanding how long I had kept my eyes deliberately closed. She had known. She had tried to protect me from the far edge of her dying, and I had been too deep in the comfortable story I told about my family to notice the holes. Every small dismissal, every paper left without explanation, every visit that ended with me feeling reduced, it assembled itself slowly into a shape I could finally see. Then a second understanding arrived, quieter and more difficult than the first. I had made this possible, not through weakness exactly, but through a habit of accommodation that had become indistinguishable from surrender. I had confused being a peaceful man with being a passive one. I had let them believe I was manageable, because managing me was easier than the alternative, and I had told myself that tolerance was dignity. I understood, sitting on the edge of that bed, that tolerance is not dignity. Dignity is something you hold actively, something you defend, not with anger, but with clarity and will. I had set mine down somewhere, and had not noticed it missing. That night I made a decision I told no one about. I did not call my sons. I did not allow myself the relief of confrontation, which would have felt satisfying and accomplished nothing useful. Instead, I put the folder inside my jacket, walked to the kitchen, made coffee, sat at the table I had built, and began to think. Not emotionally, methodically. I thought about what I owned, what the law actually said, and what I needed to secure to be safe. I had not thought this carefully in years. The grief had blurred something in me, and the blur was finally lifting. The following week I took the bus to Dubrovnik and visited a lawyer. Her name was Dr. Horvat. Her office was small and orderly, and looked like a place that had handled serious things without drama. I laid the documents on her desk. She read carefully without hurrying. When she looked up, she said, "Your position is stronger than they believe." The house was solely in my name. Their evaluations carried no legal weight. Their entire plan depended on my cooperation I had no obligation to provide. I sat with that sentence. No obligation to provide. It had been a long time since anyone reminded me I was allowed to refuse. Dr. Horvat and I met 3 times. She helped me create a formal legal record, the emails, the letter, the timeline of every event. She helped me contact my bank and restructure my accounts so nothing could be redirected without my explicit written consent. I had not thought about money as protection before. I had thought of it as practical necessity, not something to wield deliberately. That month I began to understand it differently, as a wall. I built it carefully, the same patient way I had once built the gate at the front of this house, one stone at a time, without announcing what I was doing. During those weeks I changed my behavior at home in ways that were deliberate and invisible. I stopped relying on my sons for things I had allowed them to handle, appointments, certain correspondence, practical matters I had handed over during the fog of grief. I resumed control of each one myself, quietly, without announcement. When they called, I answered briefly and without complaint. I gave them no new information. I asked no questions that revealed what I was doing. I was not cold toward them. I was simply no longer open in the ways that had previously made me easy to manage. There is a difference between being warm and being transparent. I had confused the two for too long. I took longer walks in the mornings. I ate properly, which I had stopped doing after she died. I pruned the fig tree she had planted, which had grown wild with neglect over 2 years. I repainted the iron gate. These were not performances. There was no audience for them. They were acts of ownership, repeated daily, each one reminding me that this life was mine. Something happens when you begin moving through your own space with intention rather than habit. The rooms feel different. The objects inside them feel like yours again rather than things that happen to surround you. I had been a guest in my own house without realizing it. I stopped being a guest. By the 3rd month, Marco called to say they were planning to visit in spring with some things that needed to be finalized. He used finalized with the quiet confidence of a man who believes the conclusion has already been reached and only the formality remains. I said, "Come whenever you like. I will be here." I set the phone down. I did not feel the familiar tightening their visits had been producing in my chest. I felt calm, the specific calm of someone who is prepared, who knows what is coming, and has already decided how they will meet it. That feeling was new. I sat with it and said nothing. They arrived on a Saturday in April, together, which I had expected. 2 men arriving together for a negotiation signals that they believe the other party requires management. They carried their folders. They sat at my table with the posture of people who have rehearsed. Marco opened his materials with the practiced precision of a lawyer who has done this many times, measured, methodical, certain. Ivan leaned back and let his brother carry the argument, ready to appear reasonable when reasonableness was required. They made their case. My age made independent ownership impractical. Market timing was favorable. This arrangement was in my best interest. They were very prepared. I let them finish completely before I spoke a single word. I had watched them use silence as pressure, pausing after statements to let discomfort persuade. I let the silence sit without feeling any pressure at all. Then I picked up my folder from the chair beside me and placed it on the table. I did not explain what was inside. I simply opened it and let them read. The printed emails, the timeline, the legal record, my wife's letter, and a formal statement of full legal ownership and certified mental competency, signed and notarized 3 weeks prior. I watched the certainty leave Marco's face. I watched Ivan look up at me as though he were looking at someone he had never seen. I spoke quietly. I said I would not be signing anything. I said I was aware of the conversations with the developer that had begun before their mother was buried. I said I had retained legal counsel, that my finances were secured, and that any further attempt to question my competency or pressure a property transfer would receive a formal legal response. I did not raise my voice. I said only what was necessary, nothing more, and stopped. There is a particular power in stopping, in saying the precise amount and not a word beyond it. I had learned that from watching my wife, who always knew when to be still. The silence lasted longer than anyone expected. Then it broke, not with remorse but with the mechanics of exposure. Marco said Ivan had pushed the timeline. Ivan said the developer contacts were Marco's. They argued in front of me the way they had as boys, without awareness of how they appeared, the alliance they'd arrived with dissolving in minutes. I stood up. I said I was starting dinner and asked if they were staying. They were not. I walked to the kitchen and listened to the front door close. Then the car start, then the quiet. I stood still for a moment and let the quiet settle around me. I stood at the kitchen window after they left. The April light came in low and orange, landing on the green tiles she had chosen. I want to be accurate about what I felt, because I think it matters. Not triumph, not the hot satisfaction of winning. Something quieter than that, a kind of returning. As if a version of myself I had set down somewhere had simply walked back through the door and decided to stay. The house felt like mine again in a way that had nothing to do with documents or legal language. It felt like mine the way it had always felt before I had allowed it to feel otherwise. That was enough. In the months that followed, Ivan did not contact me. Marco did once, in June, a message that said, without using those exact words, that he understood he had gone too far. I let 3 days pass before I replied. I said I was open to rebuilding something, but it would require honesty, time, and no pretending the previous year had not occurred. He said he understood. We have spoken twice since. The conversations are careful and slow, and I do not yet know what they will become. Trust, when it has been taken apart deliberately, cannot be reconstructed quickly or through goodwill alone. It requires different material than what was there before. The fig tree bloomed this summer for the first time in 3 years. I do not know if there is meaning in that. I am too old to assign significance too freely, but I noticed it, and it gave me peace. The house is quiet now in the way it is when you have stopped dreading what may happen inside it. I cook in the mornings. I walk to the sea. I read in the evenings. I have resumed the small rituals grief had suspended, and I find they still fit me. It is not a large life by most measures, but it is completely mine, and that turns out to be worth considerably more than I had been led to believe. What I want you to take from this is not a story about sons who failed their father, though that is part of what is true. I want you to understand that I was complicit in my own diminishment, not because I was weak, because I had learned to be small inside my own life, and told myself that smallness was peace, that accommodation was dignity, that staying quiet was the same as staying whole. The moment I stopped confusing those things, everything changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. If you have ever been made to feel your quietness makes you manageable, hear me, it does not. You can change that without raising your voice once. I am 81 years old. I live in a white house with a fig tree and a kitchen with green tiles. I have buried my wife and survived my son's betrayal, and I am not finished. Neither are you. Before you leave, I want to ask something. What do you hold on to, not because it is practical, but because it proves you existed, that you loved, that you built something real? Whatever that is, it is worth protecting. The person who knows what they are worth does not argue about it. They act accordingly. Tell me in the comments, do you believe it is ever too late to reclaim what was always yours?